Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3, Thrones of Decay. And in this particular video, I am going to be talking about 5 very important lessons that Creative Assembly should take from Thrones of Decay and the success it has enjoyed. Some things that they should do going forward, and certain things that they may want to avoid, because, yeah, there's always some issues that do come up that may have been a bit unexpected. So, first off, let's talk about existing campaigns, and I think this is a very crucial lesson. Be it Karl Franz or Balthazar Gelt, these two campaigns have ended up in a significantly better place than they were before. They're both very powerful legendary lords at the moment, and they both have a much greater experience. I would even dare say that Balthazar Gelt has the most power in an Imperial campaign. So this is a very crucial lesson, because there's plenty of legendary lords in the game, good legendary lords, but we have certainly seen this tendency that a DLC comes out and the existing lords fall behind. What is really nice about Thrones of Decay and the lesson that Creative Assembly should take going forward, even if it is effort they may not necessarily be willing to engage in, but it does pay off. You make people happier when you do something like this. So Karl Franz basically taking a page from Jan Bo's campaign, and Gelt having his own very unique mechanics. I'm really impressed with Gelt more so than anything else. And not just because he's powerful or the mechanics are engaging, but also because they put a lot of effort. Those spell effects that didn't exist before, just the visuals alone, it's exciting as hell. Like, there's been very few situations for someone in my position where I'm playing a lot of Total War constantly to just be like, wow, that is freaking amazing. Like, the spell effects with Gelt did have that effect. So that is a very important lesson that Creative Assembly should carry forward, because there's plenty of legendary lords that do need updates, be it Mazda Mundi for the Lizardmen, Teclis for the High Elves, Tyrion's victory conditions, so on and so on and so on. Plenty of campaigns there, and I think this is a standard that Creative Assembly needs to keep up with. Like, Thrones of Decay is a new standard. It isn't the ceiling, it is the floor. And I certainly hope with the Cafe and DLC that we get updates for Xiao Ming, Miao Ying, maybe not to the same extent that Gelt and Karl Franz had, but to be honest, Gelt and Karl Franz needed significant updates. Xiao Ming and Miao Ying, not quite as much, but yeah, Greases, Scrag as well could also benefit from that. Just an idea, but I think it is certainly one of the greatest achievements of Thrones of Decay that they did update Karl Franz and Gelt in such a very significant way. At number 4, we have the subject of racial reworks and how important they have proven to be. Because you can create a great legendary lord or a series of great legendary lords, and you end up with lackluster campaigns because the races themselves haven't been updated, improved, or reworked in a major way. What needs updated, what needs reworked, what needs improved, that's a whole different discussion that I've had before, but suffice to say, we do want improvements. Even for perfectly good races, improving things to make for a better experience is something that I consider crucial. And this is kind of like where Nurgle falls short in Thrones of Decay, because it is ridiculous that all the Nurgle campaigns have unpleasant mountain climate, and yet all of them, without exception, have to deal with it in some way, shape, or form. That makes Nurgle campaigns less exciting, and I am absolutely certain if I were to do a poll on this channel about what kind of race the people enjoy the most of Thrones of Decay, Dwarves would probably come out on top, Empire second place, and in third place, far behind that, like probably 10% of people, if not less, would vote for Nurgle. Like, don't get me wrong, Nurgle is in a significantly better spot. You get better you get a much better economy, infections, though I think that needs some tweaking, more units, more unit variety, and Tamarkan's campaign with his chieftains is certainly a great campaign. But at the same time, the climate limitations are annoying. Like, let me just say this. They've made dealing with Grimgor in this campaign not an exciting thing to do just because of the climate thing. Like, that's the difference. Like, dealing with Grimgor is a fun experience. So in Draziv's campaign, Kolik's campaign is a genuine challenge in a lot of ways, as much of a challenge as you can get in this game. And he is quite insane to deal with, but it's just pretty much not worth it in a Nurgle campaign. It's just better to cheese the vassalization system and vassalize him. So that, and vassalization in itself is less exciting. So that is a very crucial point. Race reworks matter, climate matters, and design of campaigns does matter as well. I know there were going to be issues with Tamarkan's campaign just because of the climate situation alone. I wasn't surprised by this, just a bit disappointed. This is one aspect that they could do better with. And also we can talk about terrain. Like, the place you fight the campaign in is just as important. I gotta say, Tamarkan's starting situation, not exactly the most exciting one in quite a few ways. You do get to fight Kolik early on, but yeah, that's just it, really. And number 3, it is variety of recruitment options, hero options. That is quite very important. And the great thing that they've done for all 3 races that are affected by Thrones of Decay is they have certainly increased that variety. See, pre-patch, consider the dwarves as an example, the best example even. Pre-patch, the best thing you could do as the dwarves by far and away was get a tier 2 barracks, get a Thane, get quarrelers and quarrelers with great weapons, get an artillery shop, get grudge throwers, and those would be your armies for like 20-30 turns. And you never really needed to change that because there was absolutely no reason. It was a very effective army. It still is a very effective army. It does work. But this is where the genius comes in of what CA did in Thrones of Decay that they should apply to many other races. I think this is a point where people need to understand this. Having variety of units is not just about power, because you gotta consider like upkeep costs and all that. How do you build your army? Having a variety of really good choices, be it infantry, cavalry, flying units, doesn't matter, is a great thing to have. For too long in Total War, we've been stuck in this position where the most exciting part of a campaign is the early game. The CA themselves have acknowledged this. They're not blind to this situation. So I think it's great that in Thrones of Decay, consider the dwarves, for instance. We now get Iron Drakes and Thunderers at tier 2. We get Gyrocopters, and they're significantly better with Thrones of Decay. You want to use them in pretty much every dwarf campaign. You get heroes at tier 2 for the Empire, for Nurgle, for the dwarves. Even if it's just one hero, that kind of variety makes campaign exciting. Because you still have to worry about building slots. You still have to worry about, like, what are you going to build, how are you going to build it. You got to balance out between unit recruitment and economic structures. But having that choice is an amazing thing to have. Yes, you might be building stuff early on and deleting buildings. That's optimal. You could also still make it work with things like Dwarf Warriors and Miners of Blasting Charges, or if you were talking about the Empire, Archers, and then Crossbowmen, you can still do that. But just the ability of going in different ways makes campaigns so much better. It's no joke. Like, I've played Dwarf campaigns, Empire campaigns, Nurgle campaigns, and I've gone with very diverse armies. Depends on the situation, depends on the foe that you are tackling. One of the great things about Champions of Chaos is the sheer variety you brought in terms of your armies. Well, this is not quite like that, but it is giving you those choices. What do you just focus on a doom stack of a particular unit, like Gyrocopters? Do you go for a variety with Iron Drakes, Thunderers, Quarrelers? Do you go artillery? Do you go rangers? Just an example. For the Empires, do you go handgunner units or outriders? Do you go infantry? Do you go cavalry? Those are choices, and choices make it better. Variety is the spice of life, as they say. And I think this is an excellent thing that Creative Assembly has really improved with Thrones of Decay. I'm really happy about it. Like, if there was something I was personally happy about, this would be very high up there. I do hope that with Cafe especially, and Ogres, like Ogres and Cafe have the same problem. If you're playing Cafe and campaign, there is almost no reason in that early portion especially, but really throughout much of your campaign when it matters, to recruit anything other than Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior crossbowmen. In an Ogre campaign, you're just using the boys, basically, in that campaign. Whereas the exciting stuff, the things like lead belchers, all the monstrous stuff, all the heavy artillery that Cafe has, flying artillery even, barely gets used. Whereas in a Dwarf campaign, it does get used. In an Empire campaign, it does get used. This is one of the strengths that Elspeth and Malachi have in particular, and also Tamarkan. It's notable to say that all the new Legendary Lords, they do have that variety of units. That not only do those races they're part of have more variety, far more variety than they had before, but furthermore, on top of that, you get 3 new campaigns that have more variety on top of the baseline of their race. So really great job on that, CA. Continue forward with it because you hit gold with it. And number 2, objective-based campaigns. Be it Gelt or Malachi in particular, but even Tamarkan as well, though to a far lesser extent and certainly less successful than the other two. We do now have some really good objective-focused campaigns. For Gelt, it's limited. For Malachi, it's the entire business that he's part of. And having these systems in a game, having the ability of making choices, narrative choices in a campaign, or choices on which units you're going to upgrade, is a very significant benefit. I've generally been annoyed when Creative Assembly has tried to push us down a story path, so to speak. Be a Vortex campaign in Warhammer 2, the Realms of Chaos campaign, it does get boring and tedious. What I think is a great lesson from Thrones of Decay is that it can be done in a good way that is actually exciting. For the most part, I think that there are still improvements, even with Malachi. But, like, consider Gelt's choices. You can go back to the Empire, you can stay in Cathay, you can conquer Cathay, you can be allied with Cathay. You can do both, actually. Like, you can take territory over here and just focus on that as opposed to defeating the nomads and just, take your time, manipulate the situation in your favor so that you end up with a lot of power as a result of it. That is an exciting campaign system. Same with Malachi. Lots of choices there in campaign. Like, what unit do you go for? What do you prioritize? How do you prioritize? What's more important? A lot of people may have fallen down the cannon path, but in reality, gyrocopters, gyrobombers, let's be honest, Goblin Hero is not exciting, but Thunder Barges, absolutely. So, and organ guns, sure, it's really these kind of fun systems that make it work. Tamarkan, less so, because it does get tedious having to go do, sack or raise 20 settlements or something like that. That's less exciting. But Gelt, Malachi, they knock it out of the park from my perspective in this respect. If only the Changeling, I'll be honest, if the Changeling had been as well designed as even Gelt is right now, let alone Malachi, that would have been a much better campaign. So less tedium, more choices, more consequences, options. Lots of quest battles as well. You gotta appreciate that about Thrones of Decay. Lots of interesting quest battles. You can skip them with an auto-resolve quest battle mod, but they're fun for, a couple of times at the very least. They don't get boring that quickly. So yeah, great situation over there. And I think the extra variety you get in Malachi's campaign in terms of units, because you do get some of those units for free, is even better. That's the thing. That's what I'm talking about with variety as well. It's that variety, it's those choices, it's those consequences. And having a more dynamic campaign or a campaign experience that doesn't feel the same every single time. You can play a Gelt campaign in so many different ways. You can just play the straightforward path, which is probably the most boring one. You can go back to the Empire. Can work, but you can then manipulate Cathay to end up being the overlord of all of Cathay if you so desire. And that is great. And finally, at number 1, we have the new Grudge system, the Grudge system rework from Age of Reckoning to confederating other Dwarf Legendary Lords to the legendary grudges. The entire grudge system as is phenomenal. Because what it does, fundamentally speaking, is it forces people to go out there and do things that they wouldn't have done otherwise. They wouldn't have bothered with. And that means they're engaged with the game more. Furthermore, this helps with longer campaigns, because one of the problems that a lot of strategy games have, not just Total War, but an issue a lot of strategy games have, is that things can be exciting very early on, but it's very easy in the long term for things to get pretty boring, pretty dull, and forgettable in a long campaign, especially for these kind of games with grand strategy elements. This is something that the Grudge system helps with, because with Age of Reckoning, you're incentivized to go out there and settle grudges for the sake of an Age of Reckoning. You don't have to, and I think this is where a lot of people were mistaken pre-launch and post-launch. Though, to be certain, balancing does need to happen. I think, like, initially it may have been too harsh, especially for certain campaigns, looking at Forik over there. But now it's become too trivialized. So some balancing changes still need to happen with this. Some improvements to be sure, but it is a system that pushes you as a player to go out there, get outside your comfort zone, and deal with the grudges. Can be abused, can be exploited, has its issues, but is such a marked improvement in the way we just play campaigns in general. Don't get me wrong, I like the Empire in Thrones of Decay, but I've certainly had the most amount of fun playing the dwarves purely because of this. But that's not all that we get here. We also have the legendary grudges, which are just long-term objectives in a campaign to aim for. Like, you know, dealing with the underway situation, dealing with the High Elves. I played the Grumbrindle campaign, conquered all of Ulthuan, and then allied Nakar. Yes, a bit silly, I know. But it pushes you to go do things you wouldn't have otherwise done for these rewards. Some of them are obviously better than others, but it significantly changes the way you would play a campaign. You don't need to care about these objectives, or certainly not all of them, but it is something that does make things more interesting, especially in terms of replayability. Very few campaigns are going to be the same because of this, when you combine it with Age of Reckoning. And then finally, of course, confederating under legendary lords. Confederations are gimmicky in the way they work by default. Like, you can abuse it to put the AI in a position where we can confederate and force a confederation for normal diplomacy. But I think just having a system where the game is telling you, go out there, do things, and then you can, and once you do enough of the thing, you can then get other legendary lords, which adds more variety, more excitement, more campaign terrain to deal with, assuming the faction survives. And if they don't, you get them. Anyway, so that is a great level of power. Combine this with the Dwarf Endgame crisis, and it makes for a hell of an interesting situation to deal with. And as stated, this makes longer campaigns in particular, which can suffer from the grindy aspect, it makes them more interesting, it makes them more dynamic, it adds that kind of variety. So these are the lessons, I think, Creative Assembly should take, learn from, improve upon, because there's always room for improvement. Take these lessons, improve upon these concepts, go further, and give us a better experience. And hopefully that is what they are going to do. This is why I'd consider Thrones of Decay a floor, not a ceiling, in terms of the quality we expect from them going forward. Phenomenal job across the board. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Thrones of Decay is the best DLC Creative Assembly has ever released by far. And it's for these kind of reasons that it is so. It's not like, oh, we get some cool units like Thunderbarges. No. It's not that we're buying power. It's that the systems of the game have fundamentally gotten a vast improvement that we just haven't ever seen before. I mean, I guess you could say that the Grudge system, the objective campaigns, all that, we could look back at Troy, for instance, and consider this an improvement, but it is so much better than Troy or any other time that CA has ever tried to do objective-based campaigns or create systems where you're forced to go out there and deal with things. Much better handling of it here than at any other point in Total War history. Costine signing out. Let me know what you guys think, or what else would you consider a very significant or crucial lesson that Creative Assembly needs to learn from Thrones of Decay, and I'll see you next time.